Well, guys, I'm here to confess.
What's up, man?
I don't believe God exists anymore.
Neither do we.
Yeah, I don't believe in God exists either.
Welcome back, you dirty, dirty people, to the Dirty Work Podcast. We are so excited to have you. Life just keeps getting better.
Mm-hmm. Life rips.
Life rips, man. And I think I'm so excited because we're talking about a subject today, which we've all been excited for quite some time.
Yes.
Why three Christian men can sit here and say, God doesn't exist. At least the caricature of God that people often push. So that's what we want to touch on today.
Yeah.
God, what is God? Who is God? Those are big questions, but let's talk about them a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, first I guess we should probably start by kind of apologizing for some of Christian culture, which has painted God in a very shallow, almost pagan description or depiction, where you kind of see that painting where God's like floating on the clouds. Mm-hmm. And that's almost what I think some people think Christians believe.
It's very Baal, very Zeus-like.
Yes.
When somebody says God the Father, I still may picture a guy who's kind of like Zeus. What do you guys think of when I say that? You picture old man?
Well, is it possible that's why, God says as one, like not to make graven images of himself, is for the fact that the moment you try to depict God, you just drastically reduce him, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a reason that Christ is the image of the invisible God. Yep. But God himself, God the Father, is something which we will never understand fully.
And that's why in the Orthodox Church, you do not make icons of God the Father. Mm-mm. In the West, it's crept in a little bit, but in the East, you do make icons of Christ because it is preaching an incarnate theology.
Yeah.
That's just a free tip.
A psychology department in North Carolina released a study of, they surveyed 500 people and had them draw pictures of what they believe God looked like. Mm-hmm. And one dude drew a picture of what he thought God looked like, and it looked like your prototypical lifeguard named Steve. Oh, no. Like, it was just so full of white bias. It was incredible. Yeah.
Like they drew
so
God as
a muscular, shirtless guy with like his nose, like a nose strip.
Little red shorts. Are you going to pull it up?
Up until a couple...
100%. You can't see it on...
That looks like Elon Musk.
You can't see it on here?
Yeah.
There you go.
Maybe we could link
it. Doesn't even have a beard. At least Zeus is like... You know what I mean?
Odin's missing an eye.
Cool.
Yeah, cool.
This guy, like...
He does have curly hair, kind of. Maybe he's Jewish.
I don't know.
But I think up until a couple years ago, or maybe more.
Maybe more than that.
Couple like two. Definitely more than a couple. Let's say like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
5-10 years ago. I remember my dad and I having a conversation like, could you ever see God the Father? And now I think that's so silly. Yeah. And I do know Christ corrects me. You've seen the Father. He corrected his disciples. But you go, I think there's still that idea that floats around a lot that like, yeah, God isn't a person, but he's something you could see. And then you go like, well, what's he look like? Like the screensaver that pops up on your computer that's like lines and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a silly question, and it shows sort of the caricature and the false idea of God that I'm not saying it's been pushed in like a negative way that's trying to control people. That just legitimately has been pushed by, and you mean it with all sincerity, but people who just don't know better sometimes because it's just pushing what they're taught.
And what happens is when you paint God in that picture, no pun intended, you basically give atheists ammo, right? Mm-hmm. Because then they go, well, if God's floating on a cloud somewhere, let's use our telescopes, right? And you go, oh, well, he's not in our galaxy. He's not in our solar system, right? He's not in the universe. God doesn't exist.
We have the ability in the 60s. We finally get to the moon.
Yeah.
We fly up there. We go, well, he's not around. And you go, because we've never talked about the Greek gods who exist on some sort of plane on Earth or a different dimension.
We don't believe that thunder is the hammer of Thor. We don't believe that God is like, people are riding on lightning.
And to quote Bishop Robert Baird, he said, God is not a being in the universe, but the necessary contingency for the fact the universe can exist. Mm-hmm. Right? And so you got to think of, when we say being and we're thinking phenomenologically, God doesn't exist in the sense that this cup exists. a thing in the world that I can touch like this, you could say that God is the only thing that exists.
If anything were to exist,
it's God.
It's God.
Because all of us are animated by his uncreated energies, which is something we'll speak about a little bit more. But even just that, it's a paradigmatic shift to think of, well, God exists in a way that like he's, when you think God is everywhere with you. Well, that doesn't mean he's sitting right next to you. It's way
Well, the problem
better
is
than that.
we define the word exist as anything that we can measure or actually hold in our hands.
Yeah.
So in that case, no, God does not exist. We can't measure him. He's unquantifiable. And that's where I think that's where we get tripped up the most. But,
Yeah, exactly.
Agreed.
yeah. Absolute. He's unbound.
Ineffable.
Ineffable.
Yeah, and this isn't I've heard it said where it's almost like, oh, well, Christians used to believe more in this pagan view of God, where he was this man. And what happened is as science crept in and we began to push God further and further into the gaps, the Christian understanding of God almost like evolved with this idea. So it was like originally God was in the sky and heaven. And well, now we can see the stars. So now we go, oh no, he transcends it. And so now we've gotten to a point where basically Christianity has made God into this really abstract concept in order to avoid detection.
But
You know what I mean?
what's funny is if you read any of the church fathers, they're going to have a language and a vocabulary that describes, as best you can, God in ways that are much more transcendent than you would hear, let's say, a modern Western Christian describe God today.
Yeah.
They're, the caricaturization and sort of push of God as a person being in the universe seems like more of a modern invention in Christianity, actually. Like, if you read any of the fathers, they're not thinking God is this guy who sits on a throne in the clouds.
Yeah.
And I think even if you're going back to ancient Judaism, or pre-Christ, right? When you're thinking, even reading the Old Testament scriptures, yes, you get that anthropomorphic language of the trail of his robe fills the whole heavens. He's on the throne, right?
The world, like he can fit in his hands.
But you even have in the Psalms, you have God saying, I am transcendent and immanent.
They're metaphors for things that we cannot describe.
So even there you have, if I go down to Sheol, there you are. Where can I escape your presence? Even there you have this ineffable, transcendent view of God with what maybe some modern people want to say primitive Jewish Hebraic culture. Even there, I'm not saying that nobody can conceptualize God that way, but even there you have an idea of God as the ineffable one.
And early on, even the Romans called Christians atheists.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they didn't believe.
They seem to worship a God that didn't exist.
They didn't believe in these pagan gods.
so good.
So they
Yeah.
were like, well, you believe in a God that you can't even we can't even comprehend. You don't believe in a God.
Yep.
You're an atheist.
And
which is crazy.
Looping it back around too, you'll hear a lot of modern atheists or even proponents of modern atheists like Ricky Gervais. Thank you for The Office. It's a great show, but you got to study theology better. Say like, I just believe in one less God than you. You know what I mean? He'll say to Christians like, well, you don't buy into Zeus or Thor, right? Or Hemo, Higo, Nisha. I don't know whatever the hell the Hindu gods are. They're idiots. They suck. And
Shiva.
Yeah, Shiva.
Ganesh.
Shiva. I get it. I know the names of them.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
All them tentacles.
Because there's so many, okay? There's too many. Get your shit together. But
they're more like representations of,
But like, that's so offensive.
Humanity.
I apologize.
This is really
went off the rails so quick.
Well, our
But
whole
they'll be
marketplace is Buddhist.
they'll be like, I just believe in one less God than you. And you go, no, you don't, because we've never conceptualized God that way. No, you like. It's not like we believe in Yahweh, who's this being, and then all of these 99 we don't. And you go, no, you don't even understand the fundamental basic concepts that the church fathers have been writing about for thousands of years. As stated, even Bishop Barron's quote, we don't believe God is a being in the universe like you and me. He's our creator. It would be. It doesn't really make sense for him to be.
he's our
just
father,
like us.
but he's not a father you can touch.
And one
not a father
possible reason for the miscommunication is that often in the scriptures they'll anthropomorphize God. So they'll say, God's hand or his.
So it's
feet or his
understandably,
mind.
I think, misconstrued.
Yes, but it's obvious, and this is talked by all ancient Christians. I'm talking 2,000 years ago. They're already saying, obviously God doesn't have hands. These are human ways of explaining actions, right, of God, activities of God, the energies of God, which we'll discuss later.
And
What the heck was that?
thank you, God.
Oh my word!
And not to derail that real quick, but just even speaking of when we're talking about that, like it's necessary for us to anthropomorphize because we need systems and constructs to convey language. How do you convey the ineffable? He's going to have to reveal himself in ways that we can understand through his uncreated energies because we can't interface with his essence. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. But even thinking about the idea of like anthropomorphizing and these sort of things is Yeah, again, it's important to realize that when you're doing that, like you're doing that because you need to convey information.
Yeah.
You need to convey thoughts, and the way you do that is speaking in the vernacular of humans, that which is otherwise ineffable. And in the East, the apophatic theology is a bit more popular, but that is basically negating. So we can say things are not. And Will, you were sort of touching on that a little bit. God is our Father, but he's not a Father like we know earthly, because he transcends all that, right? And so we can say God is love, but he's not really love in the way that we might think of love, because our viewpoint is so finite. And then cataphatic theology would be positive things, so saying what God is. Well, God is love. Scripture reveals that to us, those sort of things. But it's important to not lose this very popular trend, especially in Eastern Orthodoxy, of apophatic theology, because we can affirm God as our Father without letting that box us into whatever we know our earthly father to be like, and so on and so forth.
And Christians for centuries and centuries and millennium have always, like you said, described by the negative. It's he's infinite, right? Or he's he's not effable, he's ineffable, right? He's indescribable. He's the opposite of that which could be described. They never actually explain God. It's almost always God is the thing which is just out of your grasp.
I think
always.
Chris Tomlin actually started. Like he's the one who pioneered the idea.
He's a proponent of apophatic
what a bro.
theology.
He really is.
He's actually very intelligent.
Way to go, Chris.
I bet his IQ's like
At least 100.
High. Do we know what a high IQ is? High.
Yeah.
CCM.
Average IQ is
very high
100 with
IQ.
a standard deviation of 10. So a high IQ would be
But I think
definitely
the
anything
CCM
over
average IQ is
110.
88.
Sorry.
Anyway,
All right, so this
those are
is-
some good talks. Let's dive into what you have here.
I have a cool quote by this man named Theophilus. So he was an early
I don't know why
Christian.
that was-
He was an early Christian. He wrote to this guy named Autolycus in about like 160
These
AD.
are all real names.
So again, this is writing.
Second century.
He's writing
Very
within
early.
like a couple generations of the apostles themselves. So this isn't someone who's modernizing Christianity at all. And this is just one of the quotes, which I think is pretty cool. He says, "Hear, O man, the appearance of God is ineffable and indescribable, and cannot be seen by the eyes of flesh. For in glory he is incomprehensible, and in greatness he is unfathomable, in height inconceivable, and in power incomparable, in wisdom unrivaled, and in goodness inimitable, in kindness unutterable. And if I say he is light, I but name his own work. And if I call him word, I but name his sovereignty. If I call him mind, I speak of his wisdom. And if I say spirit, I speak of his breath. If I call him wisdom, I speak of his offspring. If I call him strength, I speak of his sway. If I call him power, I'm just mentioning his activity. And if providence, I but mention his goodness. If I call him kingdom, I but mention his glory. And if I call him Lord, I mention his being judge. If I call him judge, I speak of him as being just. If I call him father, I speak of all things as being from him." And right there, you see him basically
That's awesome.
saying, like, whatever you call him, you're just speaking of either a created attribute or a created energy of God, or you're just anthropomorphizing. Oh,
Yep.
God is mind. What's that mean?
Yep.
Oh, he's wise. You know what I mean? But there's no
And
way of
that,
pinning
again,
him down.
that's important. It gets the point across. And then he sort of has apophatic theology in that he backs up. Like, if I call him judge, I don't mean judge in the way that we conceptualize, but judge in the way we know helps to get the point across that what should judges do? They should, administer justice, right? And so
Right.
it's important to see that. What year is that? 160, 162? What'd you say?
It was like 160. Yeah, AD.
Right from the beginning. This isn't what we want to get across. Is this isn't some new thing. No high-level Christian thinker, if you will, has ever conceptualized God in the way that the modern atheists want to frame, or with all sincerity and respect, in the way maybe like a lot of Christians just going around think about. And that's not necessarily. You're not sinning by thinking of God incorrectly. We all think of God incorrectly.
We once had this conversation, and it's probably been mentioned on the podcast before, but you had a great quote once. I'll paraphrase it. But we talked about this, and you said, "I'm no better for understanding the hierarchy of how to understand God any more than my grandma is, who thinks God is the guy on the throne."
Yep.
She has the relationship with Christ. She loves God. Maybe she can't get over that hurdle of what she was taught in 5th grade.
Yeah.
But again, like you said, that's not. You're no less of a Christian for thinking that.
Exactly.
It's just.
You're not a
you
heretic
know.
for thinking that either, because you are a lay person in a church who you're not the one espousing the doctrine
Yeah.
out there. So there's
Like you
a
said, we're all
difference,
gonna
right?
we're all gonna
Again,
meet God one day. He's gonna be like, "You didn't get that right about me."
Yeah,
He's like, that's fine.
If we all had to take a theology test before we enter the kingdom, we would all fail at some point. That's obviously not the goal, right? But in terms of being able, it's very important if you're a person who runs in certain circles with people. And I think it's just very important for people who have the caricature of God, and that's a stumbling block for them. And maybe they're even aggressively have a caricature of God against Christians. It's very important for them to know that the most fundamental level, every Christian thinker, knows God is the ineffable. He's not he's not Zeus. We never thought about that. We're higher than that. It's a better religion. It's the true religion, right? So we don't have these BS versions of God where you can cut his heel and he dies. And we do have the greatest version of God ever, which he comes and lays his life down and dies, right? But that's different than
for sure.
Yeah.
And you'd think that the most powerful God would be a God who could connect with humanity in every stage of life, which is kind of the recapitulation idea, that God had to kind of be a fetus for fetuses and be an infant for infant and a child for children and an adult for adults. And you see that with the scalability of Christianity, where it's he can meet the person with the IQ of 45, right? In the same way as he can meet the person with an IQ of 140, 150. And you see minds that, like you said, maybe can't even take care of themselves, but they know that Jesus loves them, right? And then you have people who, Plato, who can conceive of God, and these minds that have outlasted, full millennia.
Yeah, or Maximus, right?
Maximus the Confessor.
You have the me, and then you have somebody again maybe like can't think coherently, but has a reliance upon God. And then you have Maximus, and it scales the whole way up.
Yeah. If you are someone who doubts Christianity and, for example, thinks that in more materialistic terms, believes that evolution has disproved God or that science has disproved God, take a closer look at some people like, again, Maximus the Confessor. He writes a book called On the Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ, Disputations with Purists. There's a lot of people who...
Even if you were on the Incarnation, Athanasius, that's going to blow your mind too in terms of the ineffable God incarnated.
Yes. Go to sources that meet you where you're at intellectually. Because if you're a high IQ, well-read individual and you just go to a Sunday service at a local church and you have a pastor who might not be the smartest guy, you might feel that Christianity doesn't have much to offer. But when you engage with minds that are the top minds of humanity who believe this, you can kind of tap into that consciousness and learn a lot from them.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And again, like, that's what's beautiful about go read this. Understand where you're at intellectually. If you feel like something's too low for you and you're not doing it in a prideful manner, but you go, I just feel like I'm not getting a lot out of this, go read Maximus, right? And then likewise, there are books for people who are just entering into something or that's not really their thing as much. They just want to have a general understanding. There are books for the people in that area of life as well.
It's like, it'd be like playing a sport. If you're incredible at basketball and you're just playing at your local gym after church and you're just slaughtering everyone on the court, you're going, basketball sucks.
Stop expecting to get everything out of one thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's not necessarily what church is for all the time. Maybe you're not at the church that's going to feed you intellectually. Take that upon yourself, and the church is for the meeting, the encouraging, the taking of the Eucharist, so on and so forth. But that's a good point, because it's really just expecting, I'm going to really use a bad analogy here, but like it's expecting the cherry slushy to give you coffee when you're putting that lever down. You all get what I'm saying, though, right? And that's the important. But the important thing is the
but we leave the analogies
the
up to Alex.
Yeah. I said there's me, and then there's people who really can't take care of themselves, and there's Maximus. I put myself right in the middle, and that's a middle analogy because I was able to make the analogy, but it wasn't good.
Here's one more quote too. I just wanted to read because I think it's so good as tapping in also to why we can't find God in creation. Right? This is beautiful. Again, in the first 100 years after Christ, he says, "But if you say, 'Show me your God,' I would reply, 'Well, show me yourself, and I will show you my God.' Show then that the eyes of your soul are capable of seeing, and that the ears of your heart are able to hear. For as those who look with the eyes of the body perceive earthly objects and that which concerns to this life, and discriminate between things that differ, whether it's light and darkness, white or black, deformed and beautiful, etc., the same holds good regarding the eyes of the soul and the ears of the heart. That is, that by them we are able to behold God. For God is seen by those who are enabled to see him when they have had the eyes of their soul opened." And then he basically goes on to say, well, some are blind, right? And they do not see the light of the sun, yet it does not follow then that since the blind don't see, that the light of the sun doesn't shine. But let the blind blame themselves and their own eyes. Also you, O man, who have the eyes of your soul overspread by your sins and evil deeds, as a burnished mirror, so ought man to have his soul pure. When there's rust on the mirror, it's not possible to see a man's face. So also when there is sin in a man, it's impossible to behold God.
And who is that again?
This is Theophilus. But all I say is,
brilliant
again,
quote.
what a cool point is that, sorry, you've been given eyes to see the natural world. You've been given
The
ears.
news in Orthodoxy. Yeah.
Yes, and so we need to look at that. The soul that we've been given, the mind that we've been given, is what God has given us to commune with Him. And therefore, don't use your physical eyes to find God, for you'll only find a creation. In order to find the Creator, you must search.
Isn't it funny how, from our modern paradigm, it so is very much a worldview thing. You hear that so much, but like thinking that either this is how people have always thought or this is the correct way to think, but really thinking of like, even myself, we are thinking of, okay, let me see God in this phenomenological world, this physical world. It's literally using these eyes for something that they're really not supposed to be for. And ignoring the deeper, you say nous, Orthodoxy is a word for it, but like the eyes of the heart. And just completely ignoring those. And you go, well, I don't really feel God or see God. And then you go, yeah, well, you're on your phone all day. You don't really dive in to meet with people, pray, attempt to just get your body to do the things first and the heart follows. You don't do any of the things prescribed to help you develop the virtues for, as we were just reading before the podcast, of the nature that is within you, the good nature within you. And you go, well, I just don't see God. And you go, yeah, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? It'd be like,
You're using the wrong
I just feel
instrument.
like I don't ever get stronger. And then you go, well, like, do you like go to the gym or like exercise? You do anything?
be like,
and you go like,
yeah.
well, like I went like once
looking
8
for-
months
yeah.
ago, and then I haven't been since. And you go, that is the natural progression of things. You're not getting stronger. You're not doing the things that it takes to get stronger.
Yeah, it's like trying to measure, I don't know, the depth of the ocean by using a thermometer, right?
There we go.
That's just not going to work. You're using the wrong
It was
instrument,
good.
right?
But the gym thing, man, if that resonates
No,
with some people.
I'm harping on the slushy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was admittedly bad. That was a poor analogy, and this one was better.
Yeah.
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 But you know what's good? When I'm with a group of people who haven't seen this podcast or aren't here, I'll use that.
I'd like to come up with an analogy to explain how bad yours was and how good his was, but I can't.
Yeah.
It's
Well, at
too,
least you know your
could use
limits.
it in the
I know
negative.
my
You could say it
limits.
was indescribably
I won't touch
vast, the difference,
Yeah.
ineffable.
That was an ineffably bad analogy.
I pray it resonates with somebody out there. You know your level.
All right.
These are some good talks.
Yeah. Should we jump into like panentheism?
Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about. You're getting me going.
I know.
You're getting me going.
Okay, since you're going,
All right.
get going. Give
All
the
right.
viewer
At
some
least when
idea.
I started studying this a little, I think John Crowder is the first person I remember saying panentheism. And I was like, what's going on? So when we're saying panentheism, and I would say Orthodoxy espouses maybe what you would call weak panentheism, but I speak quick. So understand me, I'm not saying pantheism,
Yes.
whereas all is God. Okay? Nature's God. People are really just God in and of themselves, so on and so forth. Pantheism would be everything is God.
Yes.
Right? When we're saying panentheism or weak panentheism, what we're saying is that God animates and is in everything. You would almost say it better if you're thinking of God as the eternal, ineffable, infinite one. Everything exists within God.
Yes.
Is probably the best way to say it. It would be strange to think that God created something if he is not spatial
Yeah.
and then entered into it because he was there first. So God is everything, right?
Yes.
And so, but again, we're not saying everything is God. It's it's just maybe sometimes you use the same words.
In part of that is going to be the essence energy distinction,
Yes.
which we'll
Yep.
get into. But this idea that we are not becoming at all we aren't co-substantial with God.
Yep.
We don't share an essence with God. Whereas pantheism would say, well, I am God to some extent, right?
Yes.
It's
Yep.
the universal consciousness.
And yeah,
It's whereas in this we're saying that God fills
and
all things.
panentheism, even though some would be led to believe it's heretical,
Mm-hmm.
it does. Some do, but it is not the denial. It's only heretical when it denies creation,
Yep.
and it separates the world from God, which is again not what that is.
Because we want to, like, in him, all things hold together through him, right? I mean, that's panentheism in a sense in the scripture, right?
Romans
So
11.
what we, there you go.
See, I know
What
I can quote with the best of the
panentheism
prods.
does and espouses is it stays away from the more deistic, you would say even maybe like Epicurean, we bring that up a lot, but distant God who created and he's distant and aloof, and every once in a while he might have a divine intervention and intermingle, and then he'll stop. That's deism, and that is not the historical Christian idea of a God who fills everything, is constantly active. Yes, you might and see things that seem more drastic where you go, wow, that was really God. And you don't see things otherwise. But it isn't this coming in and out of the universe because, again, the universe, the cosmos exists within him. And we are alive right now because we're animated by existence himself, which is God. And so panentheism would say God animates, fills all things. We are animated by his uncreated energies. And that is I think it's a beautiful thing because, again, if you're just harkening back to the Old Testament, where can I go? Even if I go down to Sheol, there you are. And so God fills everything and he animates your very being. So that would be panentheism as opposed to, I think, what a lot of modern Christians fall into is a sort of deistic thing of like thinking that God is distant and aloof and sometimes.
And a lot of Protestants would not say it. They would obviously reject deism, this impersonal God.
Yes.
But the only danger in Protestantism, and you'll see, especially with the more Reformed doctrines, is it does possibly emphasize the transcendence of God to the point where it almost feels distant. I think John Calvin was quoted at some point saying something like, the finite can't hold the infinite, right? Like the humanity cannot hold the divine because it's too big for us. Whereas the Orthodox would say the exact opposite, right? It's that we possess God within us, right? Exactly. We are temples of God, and that Christ lives in us and dwells in us. And so,
I think Carl Rayner, is that name sound familiar? Dictionary of Theology, I think, is this quote. And he says, "The mystery of the living God, utterly transcendent, is also the creative power who dwells at the heart of the world, sustaining every moment of its evolution," which is a really cool quote. Yeah.
It's really cool.
That's really cool. And so I think that's an important doctrine as well, because just the idea when you separate yourself from, let's say, a weak panentheism, and even though you wouldn't think that God is distant, you believe in a loving God, you're a Christian. One of the dangers with that more like distant and aloof view is sort of a coldness, an austereness, and a transcendence to God while he is transcendent that lacks, like you were saying, the immanence. I think that he's immanent, he's near. God is constantly animating you, filling you. You are surrounded by love himself. God, and so it's just it's a good shift, I think, to focus on, and it widens your view of God, and again, we all exist within God.
And I've heard Christians often describe God as omnipresent, but sometimes as a kid growing up, you'd always be like, so is God just like everywhere? Like you'd almost think it's like he's all around me. But it's like, no, he's within you. And that's a very different idea than God. God isn't like in every place, he's within every place. And so he fills his creation. And so therefore he's not just present like within space. He's present within like subatomically, right? Like he is that which upholds even the atomic structures.
I do like it's Luther who likens it to God being in and around every grain, in the sense that he can be found in every, like in the sense where the physical things that we can see point to the glory and the magnificentness. Is that a word? I said it, of God. And I think it's Athanasius who likens the universe to like an infinite sponge, just soaking up God's glory continuously, which I think is also awesome. The idea that, again, that God is outside of everything, but he's within everything as well, holding it all together. Again, not that he is that
again,
object,
anything that exists can't exist apart from God. Evil is a privation of the good and being itself. And so if things are going to exist, they only exist because God is animating them. And to add to that, on the incarnation, Athanasius does, he sort of gives, I think it's probably like a poke in the eye to the Gnostics or whatever, but he talks about, he's like, you have no problem believing God fills everything, fills all things. But for some reason, and people are a part of everything, but for some reason, you Gnostics have a problem with God filling a human being. But he's like, you believe in filling in everything. Well, we're just a part of the all, a part of the everything, and he incarnated into human nature and filled it. And so it's just an interesting way of honestly defending the incarnation, which I thought was cool because many people do believe that, but they have the stumbling block with the incarnation. But also, again, espousing Athanasius writing the 300s, this idea that, we know God fills all things. And that is sort of the mystery of the incarnation. The ineffable, transcendent, infinite God assumes human nature. It's truly amazing. It's not like one guy, or three guys are sitting up there and then one guy's like, I'm going into a body. It's the indescribable blessed Trinity. And not all of it, the Son, the second person of the Trinity is incarnating, but amazing.
All right. You, because you're crushing it, always, you rip it. Logos, logoi. Let's break that down.
I think maybe Alex should cover that. I feel like you know that better.
You wanna
than
do that?
All of us. And then we'll bounce off of it. I can try
Well,
my best, but
Okay, so in order to understand this, should we do essence energy even first?
Yeah,
I'm not
let's do
sure
that.
which
that's maybe
I'm not sure what the best way to jump into first would be, but we do need to draw this distinction.
Come
which you
along
kind
as
of
we
pointed
figure
out.
this out.
Exactly. Because in the West, you don't see as much of this distinction. It's very much.
I definitely didn't grow up with it.
It's very
no.
much like they believe kind of in this like absolute divine simplicity, which
Yeah.
teaches that basically there's the essence of God, and that essence is that which fills all things.
Essentially coming from debates with Gregory of Palamas and Barlam, correct?
I know
Barlam
Palamas,
essentially is it of Palamas or is it Gregory?
It's just
Palamas?
Palamas.
Palamas.
Yeah.
Gregory Palamas. Palamas. Right, Barlam is seeing monks saying that they are seeing the uncreated light in their meditations up on Athos, I think, and has a problem with it, blah, 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 for such and such reasons. But he basically goes and the West champions Barlam's idea of absolute divine simplicity, which is that you can't see the essence of God.
Yes.
And they don't really have that essence energies distinction.
yeah.
Whereas Palamas was saying, correct, but we are experiencing the uncreated energies of God, which is, still God himself we're experiencing, but it's different than the essence. So the essence energies distinction is essentially, and you can dive into this a little bit more, but when we experience God, we're not experiencing him in his essence. Even if you want to think back to Exodus, right, when God says, when I appeared to you, I took no form, right? Therefore, don't make a graven image of me. But this idea that in his essence, he is indescribable. We can't know. It's almost like getting close to the sun. Even if you could get close enough to the sun to really view it, you're burned up, you're dead.
And with the
burn
sun,
up so quick
like we
you
were
wouldn't
talking
know.
about, with the sun being gas, would be the essence.
Yeah.
In essence, the sun is gas. The energies, sun melting, heat, bleaching in the sun, all those things would technically be like energies.
Yep.
How's that for an analogy?
And one of the reasons that the essence energies is important as well is the doctrine of theosis is, I think, really somewhat dependent upon that. And that might be one of the reasons you lose it in the West, which theosis is something that we're diving into further on this podcast. But, when you understand that, I think, at least from my point of view, you can understand better why people like Athanasius can say God became man so that man can become God. Well, we're not saying God in essence. We're saying God by his uncreated energies. We're participating in the divine nature, as Peter says.
Yeah, the entire hope of the future, like the whole hope of Christianity is participation with God in the eschaton. It's a final realization of full communion, kind of like in Eden, but actually more so than in Eden.
Yeah.
A full connection to God. And if all we're connecting with is another creature, which would be like a created grace or a created love or a created energy, well, are we really at all even communing with God? Or are we just communicating with his creation again?
Yeah.
Which is what we're already experiencing. And so the Orthodox Church believes that as Christians, we actually have the ability to communicate and participate in the actual uncreated energies of God. So as we become deified, as our nature is elevated, we actually begin to participate more and more with Christ himself, right? And with God himself, not in essence, but in energy.
And being that we are by definition finite because we're created, and God is by definition infinite because he is the uncreated, his essence is obviously something we can't ever fully comprehend, but we can always grow into awareness with his uncreated energies infinitely because he's infinite. So there's just the, I think, very simple distinction that by definition we are created. We can't interface with the essence of the ineffable, indescribable. But that doesn't mean we don't interface directly with God. We do. But that's the essence energies distinction.
Yeah, and it is very important in practical outworking of your salvation. It's not just like a heady idea, like some cool theological concept, while it is a very cool theological concept. Here's a couple quotes from a series of councils in Constantinople. I think the statements are really, really awesome. It says, that supremely divine light of God is neither a created thing nor the essence of God, but is rather uncreated and natural grace, illumination, and energy, which everlastingly and inseparably proceeds from the very essence of God. In God, there is both essence and essential natural energy. Even as there is an unconfused union of God's essence and energy, so also is there an undivided distinction between them. For, among other things, essence is cause, while energy is effect. Essence suffers no participation, while energy is communicable. No compounding occurs in a nature from its natural properties. So again, you see this cool distinction. And with the sun analogy, I forget who exactly brings it up. Is it Damascus? John of
Yeah.
Damascus talks about the sun
And
analogy.
Chrysostom.
Yeah, but you see, the light which comes from the sun is from the sun, and it truly is like of the sun. Yet it isn't the sun, and the essence of the sun gives off the energy, and we participate like a plant would participate in the energy, and the energy goes into the plant and fills it, and through that it produces food and that which sustains life. And we likewise, while never participating in the sun, because a plant in the sun would burn up, yet when we receive the energies of God, we are likewise filled and given life.
Yeah,
right.
It's good.
It's a beautiful analogy, and this is taught by Irenaeus, again, great the spiritual grandson of the Apostle John. I think it's Clement of Alexandria, Athanasius, Maximus the Confessor.
Yeah.
Gregory Palamas, a lot of early saints discuss this. So this isn't some, I don't know, fringe concept.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually very historical.
Yeah.
Yes.
And switches up a little bit too. Even we're gonna get right back on it here, but just even if you think more of the Western like Catholic idea of heaven, the beatific vision, beholding God's essence, in the sense is really what their sort of, I guess, hope is or something like that, but that is sort of predicated on the idea of ADS, absolute divine simplicity, which is you are beholding God's essence, which is just impossible from the perspective of a God who's indescribable, ineffable. But that doesn't mean you don't have a personal relationship with the Creator, the Father himself. There's just that distinction. And again, I know it can sound philosophical, but looking at throughout the years, looking at centuries, I think it's important to have this essence energies distinction, because some things you will lose along the way, and from my perspective at least, theosis, just when you're looking at, okay, the West diverges this way and then there's splits from the West, but because the foundation of it was sort of lost, maybe it still taught a little bit more in Catholicism than it is in Protestantism, but by the time you get to Protestantism, which is a split from the Catholic West, you're losing it altogether. So there's important things to, I think there's important, again, everyday doctrine.
Which is possible why theosis is no longer really a conversation in the Western Protestant
It's so difficult
church.
to understand because you're just hearing divine, God.
Yeah, what?
Oh, God, the God, right?
So you're saying we become gods?
Yeah.
No, dude.
It's not the Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, again,
they
that's why-
misquote the fathers when they talk about theosis all the time.
And that's why we can say
Mormons,
things like
because Mormons.
God became man that man could become God, is because we recognize that distinction. Obviously, if we didn't make the distinction, then man could never become a God, or else we would become co-substantial with God, and therefore we'd be Mormons, or we'd be whatever. Gnostics.
Mormons.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. I mean, logos, logoi. So again, this is another kind of based on the same idea, but you see the logos, which is the preeminent animating principle, which is Christ, right, the anointed one prior to his incarnation.
Yeah, you say pre-incarnate, second person of the Trinity.
Yes, exactly, the Son of God. And then you see the logoi, which are almost like the divine acts of will, which this logos actually produces. So again, it's kind of like the essence energy, and so we would be logoi, right?
Yes.
We are the created energies of God. There's the uncreated energies, which are like his grace, his mercy, his justice, his foreknowledge, right? And then there's his created energies, which would be us, and would be the person of Jesus.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so while we contain Christ within us and the Logos within us, the Logos is what animates creation. Yet we are fully distinct from the essence.
And hear that again, that's the difference between panentheism and pantheism. We're right on it. While we are animated and the only reason that we are alive and have being is because we participate in the Logos himself, we are wholly distinct from the Logos at the same time.
Yeah.
As a logoi.
Jesus himself in John 14:20 says, "In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." So you see that just everyone's in everyone. You know what I'm saying? And then Paul, I mean, I'm not sure if you could quote that part from when he's talking in the Areopagus, is it? But he basically saying that, your own poets
Mars
have
Hill,
Mars Hill, like it is in him that we
live and move and have our being.
live and have our being. And he says, as your own, poets have theorized, like, you understand this, that God is not far off from each one of us, but he is that which sustains and fills us.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So you mentioned, I think we've all read it or we're reading it. St. Maximus the Confessor, St. Maximus the Confessor Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ. I was looking up the one quote that I wanted to find. Finally found it. He's not an easy guy to like pull quotes from. It's a little long quote, but I want to read it again based off the whole essence energy distinction. Maximus says the confessor reworks the categories of time, extension, and aeonic existence in an effort to describe an indescribable state. This moving rest presupposes a kind of extension that is beyond time, and yet short of God's own utter timelessness, a temporal timelessness or eon, a moving motionlessness. On this plane, the creature enjoys eternally moving repose as a finite being open toward the infinite, and yet also knows an immobile eternal movement, since the end of the finite being is infinite and unattainable. Thus, the final stasis is thus a dialectic vibration between time and timelessness, between creature and creator. A lot to take in. But if that's not poetry at its finest,
That's awesome.
I don't
Sounds
know
like
what it is.
Einstein's string theory. Right
I
there.
know, right?
Yeah.
And his book is not one that I read it, and at the end I had to go, what did I read, and kind of reread it because it is just
Go
so
slow.
mind blowing. Yeah, go slow. It's very mind blowing.
Yeah. John, I think this is really cool too. Again, with the Logos. I'll say, instead of Logos, I'll say the Word, because that's technically kind of what it means. He says in, I think it's John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him. And without him, there's not anything that was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of man. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then skipping down to 14, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then he goes on to say, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. And so again, you see right there, even John himself saying, no one's ever seen God.
Yeah.
This is the guy who walked with Christ. He's saying, Jesus, right? Christ has made God known through the incarnation, right? And that's why the incarnation was so necessary. And the Orthodox Church teaches that even if we hadn't sinned, even if the fall hadn't happened, at some point God would have participated in human nature in order to connect with
Because the
us.
idea is that always he is bringing our humanity up into this marriage of humanity and divinity. So, and to reveal it to us, because we can't. Yes, there are things that we can see, general created order of the cosmos, but without the revealed, without the ineffable, indescribable God revealing Himself, we can't truly have the relationship with Him, because His essence is indescribable. It's ineffable, right? So,
Of course not.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. This is a really quick one. This is actually, I think, Jay Dyer said this, and I could be wrong. Usually I'm. In response to Maximus. Really, it's like a sentence, but it's really cool. It says, the logoi is the content of the manifestation of the logos. And then he says the manifestation is the Holy Spirit.
We're all thinking about it. We like it.
So
There's a lot to unpack in just those two sentences.
there's
too.
a lot. Are you saying the Holy Spirit is the Logos?
I'm
the
saying-
Logoi?
I'm saying I'm reading a quote from Jay Dyer on Maximus.
Jay,
the
come on our
Confessor.
show.
Come on, Jay.
We need you to explain this.
Yeah, seriously, we
You're
want
an
you to come
intelligent
on,
man.
dude.
There's all that to say it is this is not an exhaustive conversation of it. It is I think I can say for the three of us that of all the things that we've kind of been studying about Orthodoxy in the last year and a half, whatever, that this particular, along with theosis, which again, Danny, like you said, you kind of can't separate the two. They kind of are hinged on each other, has been the most mind-blowing, to me anyways, to truly reconnect me with, with biblical Christianity, with Christianity founded 2,000 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any more quotes?
I guess I've.
You
sorry,
got a lot you're
I know. I've got a really cool one here, which I think kind of helps to kind of sum up some of what we're talking about too, and the fact that like there's always going to be faith required, right, in Christianity, and so especially when you believe in a God that no one can see, which so and so I think there's a beautiful quote by again the early church father Theophilus, early first century or I guess second century. He writes, "Faith is required in all matters. He says, do you not know that faith is the leading principle in all matters? For what husbandman can reap unless he first trusts his seed to the earth? Or who can cross the sea unless he first entrusts himself to the boat and the pilot? And what sick person can be healed unless he first trusts himself to the care of the physician? And what art or knowledge can anyone learn unless he first applies and entrusts himself to the teacher? And he says, so it's the husbandman who trusts the earth, and the sailor the boat, the sick the physician. And will you not be in a place to place confidence in God when you have so many pledges at his hand? And so and I think that's a kind of a cool idea, though, in the fact that, like, it is true that in every aspect of life we're using faith. Whether it's we choose to sit on a table, we choose to get in our car, you're always either trusting a machine, some part of nature, or another person. And if faith is the leading principle in all of life, and we use it to navigate and to bring life to our physical bodies, why would we not assume that faith would be required to some extent for our spiritual life and our spiritual bodies, right? And I think that's kind of cool. You know what I mean?
For that which is so much greater.
Yeah.
And when all of a sudden
you trust a
don't
car
need faith for it.
For your physical safety, why wouldn't you trust then God for your spiritual? And so, again, there's always going to be faith. In the same way as how do you know you're going to get to your friend's house when you get in your car? You don't. There's always a potential that was the wrong decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your car went off the road. But faith is necessary. And so, yeah.
I can go home after that one. That was nice.
Kind of cool, right?
It is necessary. Faith is necessary for a God you can't see. And that's the important thing to think about, too. It's like there's almost less faith. There's almost less faith needed for the person who was just embodied by the Greek pantheon, right? They're out there somewhere. They're going to the altar. They're sacrificing at the altar, that sort of thing. Not that we're against physical representations, manifestations. We love icons, right? But the idea that, again, it just harkens back to understanding what the Christian idea of God is. That which is greater. Because that which you can comprehend is not God. That's one of the reasons, too, that I think naturally precedes this idea of the essence energies distinction, which is the idea of, of course we can't interface or comprehend God's essence. He's God. That which is the greatest is God. So it's always transcending what new plane of reality you begin to understand.
Because if you understood him, then you'd be God, or you'd be co-essential
you really
with him
want a
yourself.
God that you can fit inside of you.
No.
Inside your head.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't even make sense, right? If you create something, you're never going to be found like by essence in that creation. You know what I mean? You'll be found through your works in the creation, right? If you have an anthill, and I don't know what you do with anthills. How about this? You're
usually burn them.
You magnify. No, if you have like a fishbowl, the fish might not even know you exist, but when you drop the food in, they're gonna go eat it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And you're not gonna be in the fishbowl. If you fit in your fishbowl, you're way too wealthy.
Yeah.
You're needing a smaller aquarium, dude.
You will have an aquarium
Coming
if
out
you
of
fit in your fish.
Yeah, that's called an aquarium.
Or I think one of their fathers talks about like a pomegranate. And it's like, well, the seeds in the pomegranate will never comprehend the pomegranate.
Yeah.
Because it's held within the fruit itself.
Yes.
And
Yes.
likewise-
Exactly what we were
yeah.
saying back there. Like, we exist within God. He is the first thing.
The pomegranate is what clicked with,
There we go.
not the fish tank.
I think the fish
No.
tank wasn't the worst.
Yeah. It wasn't.
I've had better.
Could have been a slushy.
Pomegranate's good, though.
Cool.
That's good stuff.
I think that sounds good,
That's
guys.
good stuff.
All right. Well, boys, any takeaways?
I guess I would just say, while we've painted God, again, we've been kind of scared of this God, a pagan representation of God that's floating on the clouds, or like, is your best friend who goes to church with you kind of thing. We do believe in a God that is personal. And you see that through the incarnation, as we were saying. And so I don't want to leave people with this feeling of like, this very like unknowable, like monad.
Yeah.
Some Neoplatonist idea of like, oh, like there's this thing which, created the world but stepped away.
Yeah, and I think maybe the danger, again, of expressing how transcendent God is away from the, let's say, the distant and aloof God of deism, you don't want to then fall into this monad, one God, abstract divine mind. What you want to stress is he is greater. He is incomprehensible. He is the transcendent. But that is what makes the mystery of the incarnation so beautiful, is that he chooses to incarnate, and so that we can relate to him in a way that we otherwise couldn't.
Yeah.
That is the true grand mystery of Christianity that doesn't exist anywhere else.
I mean, really, the only reason why we even talk about this or even care about this is because we can know God.
Yeah.
We can enter into relationship with Him. If we couldn't do that, then we're talking hot air about something that really we can't relate to, and that really has no power to do anything for us.
Yeah, I've heard people say, like, well, if you believe in a God that's so ridiculously unknowable, then, like, what real hope does any person have? You know what I mean? Isn't everyone just, you know what I mean, just guessing?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, no, because we believe in Christ, and that's why Jesus is the center of the whole Christian faith, is because he's the moment when heaven and earth touched, right? He, while a divine person, he took on a human nature, so that we, as human persons, can participate in that.
If you've
divine
seen
nature.
me, you've seen the Father, right?
Exactly.
And that is the idea that, like, yes, we can know God in a way that we otherwise couldn't. And Paul says that too, right? Angels long to look into the face of what you experience as a believer, as a Christian. And that's just something that couldn't take place without the incarnation, right? And Christ, as our high priest, as Hebrews would say, can relate to us in a way, I guess, maybe God couldn't pre-incarnation, and that's like out of bounds, right? For me, like, that's strange to think about, right? But like, we, for sure, now can experience and almost relate to God in a way that we couldn't before because he chose to incarnate. And that is just, that's the foundation of the faith.
And even in the Old Testament, there were constantly, the theophanies were almost all believed to be Christ.
Yeah.
So even in the Old Testament, before Christ was incarnate as the Jesus of Nazareth, he still incarnated himself constantly, whether it was as angels, messengers, bushes, whatever.
To quote the great Irish frozen chosen prophet, John Mark McMillan, heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss.
Dude, they changed it to unforeseen because they felt sloppy. I guess.
They did.
Yeah, so
Sloppy.
they cleaned it up a little bit.
Yeah, I like sloppy, man. I like it.
Which
And
I
one
maybe
last
didn't
piece.
see it coming, but
Probably not.
we could.
One last piece of connection, which I think is kind of cool with this whole uncreated energies of God thing, is that God flows through us. And that when we do things like love or give or serve or show mercy or speak truth, we are actually participating in those energies. And that's why all people, no matter what they believe, when someone does something nice for them or loves them, it's a spiritual experience. And that is because in that moment, you are literally tapping into the uncreated energies of God. And so if you don't know God, go love someone. Right, go put a coat on an infant, right, or on a cold kid, right.
Yeah.
Go visit someone in prison, and through doing that, you will literally experience God.
It's so profound because you are experiencing God in uncreated energy, and that's beautiful. Like, that's a great way of saying it. You are connecting so much, and that's just great. Like the way you said it. If you want to experience God, I think sacrifice, help somebody,
Tell the truth.
Yeah, tell the truth, right? Because you're experiencing those uncreated energies at that point, at that moment. And that's one of the things too. It's like sometimes Christianity enters through the body first. Sometimes you have to do the things, and then that different feeling, if you will, but that experience in that other way comes. But sometimes you have to go to the altar first.
It's like the first kiss, and they always go, I felt a spark. The spark always comes after the first kiss, right? You got to kiss them first, and then that.
That's why I think that is maybe a benefit of more liturgical practice, or things that make you do something a little bit more, sort of gets you in, sometimes enters through the body, essentially.
Yeah, it's like,
'Cause we're not
I don't know God. Well, do you pray? Do you like serve?
Yeah.
Do you ever give to anyone? You know what I mean? Do you ever meditate?
And it is interesting. I understand it maybe to some extent, but like really with God would be the only, I think, area in life where people could get off the hook for being like, well, I don't know God. And it's like, do you do anything to know God? And they say no. But it'd be like, well, I just don't feel like I know my wife well, or I don't know this stranger at all. And he goes, have you ever spoken to the stranger? And you'd be like, no. And then
Have you kissed her? No. Have you hugged her? Have you gone on a date? Have you had sex? No. Well, of course you don't feel like you know your wife, dude.
Yeah. And so
Step up your
all
husband
we're
game.
saying is stop making certain caveats for your relationship with God. Just do it, man.
Just jump
You'll be fine. You know how easy it is? Doing it.
If I may,
Please.
to kind of drive this home in a
Drive it,
sentence,
dude.
while partaking in the uncreated energies of God, we'd also like you to partake in the Dirty Word podcast and subscribing.
Do you want to be a
Following
partaker of the
us.
divine nature?
Do you? Because you should listen to us and follow us, like us. Give us some things, and we're going to give you some things.
Yeah,
it's
we're
going to be a
giving
great
you
relationship. It works out for everybody.
True.
Yeah. Hit us up on all of our social medias. Follow us, like us, do the thing that you need to do. Partake in the divine nature with us and carry the cross, embrace the suffering. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching.
Yeah.
You did good.
You did good, kid.
You did good, kid.
You did good, kid. Thank you for being with us. Dirty Word Podcast. Out.
Out.